my name is Got it. Oh, and my name is Mel Hanna, and I am the new Coordinated Enrollment Specialist. I had spent time in education years ago and then went into transportation, and now I'm back in education where my passion lies. So I'm so very excited to learn and just to be able to help. And my pronouns, I go by she, her, and hers.
Thanks. And I wanted to introduce, or maybe reintroduce for some of you, another addition to our community systems team. Margie McNabb is with us, and she is returning to the community systems team and the ELD as a CCR&R coordinator. So we're really excited to have her come on board and work on that. And she will be training our meetings and doing some central coordination and childcare capacity building work too. So Margie, if you want to say hi, you go for it.
I was muted, sorry. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all. And I'm looking forward to jumping back in. I missed early care and education. What can I say?
Yay, good news. And does anyone else have any good news to share? Welcome, Mel and Kate. We actually haven't met yet, but I'm happy to have you here. Shira?
Hi, as well, I also have good news, and I would like to introduce my assistant director for Four Rivers Early Learning Hub, Heather O'Leary, and I think that she has kind of probably traveled in the same circles as Margie, and so she is just coming new to us. This is week 2 for her, and so I will let her introduce herself.
Hi guys, just like Margie, I guess I missed early learning and in the state of Oregon. So I'm back. I've been gone for about 7 years. So it's exciting to see all of the things that were started, years ago with the state of Oregon and the early learning hub system. And I'm super excited to see that just really coming to fruition. So yeah, thank you so much.
That's fantastic. Any other good news to share or great news?
This must be staff up time. I'm so excited that I just offered our admin and finance coordinator position that's been vacant here for the better part of 3 years. And and the first time we've been fully staffed up since I moved into ESD. So yay!
Yay!
Vacation coming.
Good, Brenda. I'm glad to hear that. It's helpful to have all the support that you need on your team.
Begonia is also joining that flow. After like 14 months of splitting myself, I finally hired a senior manager, and this unicorn is starting on Wednesday.
Woo-hoo! Look at this. Look at this team. We're just growing and growing and growing. I love it. Yay for unicorns. That's right. Anything else? I find I get really impatient and just like, I'm ready to go on to the next, but I'm trying to give time to let people speak up. Okay, that's all I got. If you have more good news that you want to share, I'll happily give you time at the end of the meeting. Okay. Next, we were supposed to be joined by Christopher Brown. Unfortunately, he had a personal situation that he had to deal with, so he's not able to join this meeting. However, we will make sure that we do get you legislative updates. So not quite sure how that's going to happen. I'll connect with him when he comes back to work. So just know that we know how important it is, and we will make sure that you are in the loop on those. Yes, Renee.
Hi there. Just wondering, going forward, if we could receive a written update. I know when Troy was able to share the written updates, that was really helpful for us to then share that out with our stakeholders. So that would be an ask going forward. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Written updates are helpful. Good
Yeah, we'll try to get to that, Renee. I don't know that we'll be able to do it in the next week or so, but we'll try to get to that. It's a little bit tricky with Christopher coming on brand new and diving into this session that has so much legislative work, but we'll do our best.
I can imagine. Yes, thank you.
But I can also send out the links. We should have sent it earlier, sorry, but Alyssa and several of our colleagues did present already to some legislators, and we can send out the links to that so you can see about that. And we'll make a point to send that out as they happen. There's going to be several more presentations coming up as everyone wants to understand DELC and all the programs within it.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, next up, I'm gonna put Carmen on the spot. Carmen, is that okay to put you on the spot? Can you, your eyes just got wide. Can you?
Yeah, no, sorry.
Tackle the next topic?
Totally, there's just a lot of things going on today. My brain is in a bit of a swirl. Yeah, we just wanted to touch base about deliverables. We, as Hillary was saying, we have a conversation coming up with the Hub Association executive team and really want to get some feedback and do some group thinking in that conversation about the deliverables and making sure that they're aligning in a way that's useful. And as we go forward, right now we're creating the grant agreement for the next biennium. So we want to make sure that we are planning deliverables that promote the work that you're doing and are not just like reports to us, but are also tools for you. It's been great having Erin Watson come on, who's here today too, as a consultant and help us with some of that work. But we really want to make sure that we're responsive. And this time around, we've had to do some like swapsies on the order of things and changing timelines. And while we want to continue to be responsive to you, we really want to look forward and try to prevent that as much as possible so that you have consistency and predictability in your workload. So one of the things that we've been thinking about is the work plan, and we know that some people are in different stages. Some people are basically done with the work plan or they're nearing the end of that, and that's great if people have gotten to that already. If you haven't, that's also okay. We're working toward it. The due date is in April, so it's looking like we're gonna try to align those two pieces, but we want to have a conversation with you about how we will do that and make that decision with you as our partners. So if you are feeling like April is going to be a big push and is going to be really hard with the strategic plan at the same time, take some comfort in that we're trying to put them together so that it turns into one. And if you have already completed your work plan and you're like, I don't want to smush it together with something else, like that's also fine. We don't want to ask you to reformat something or like redo something that you've already done, that you're that your governance and your staff have already worked together to do and have agreed upon. So we'll be flexible and we'll be creative about how we can take what work you've already done, if you're done, and fit it into whatever format is coming along and support you in doing that. Dorothy.
Yeah, I might just be showing my complete ignorance, but I don't know what work plan you're referring to or what template we may have received and when.
We haven't sent out a new work plan template for it, Dorothy. We had one in the past that goes through like different like Raise Up Oregon objectives and then what work is happening in your region within that. And that is so closely tied at this point with the strategic plan that we're like, let's talk about how these could go together to be, and how that could be useful or not useful.
So I'm so sorry, this like very confusing. It was for this year. It was like the work plan for 22-23 or for 23-24.
Yeah, 23-24.
Okay. And like for the overall hub, this is not like the
Yes.
coordinated enrollment, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Sorry, I think I'm the one being confusing, not you're. I'm causing your confusion. Kelly?
So is this work plan associated with our regional assessment? So are these the action items that are going to be tied to our to the regional assessment? That's just the question.
Kelly, you have asked the question that made us start having this conversation internally. So on the set of deliverables that we had, okay, like your regional assessment is going to be of the work around Raise Up Oregon Objective 2 is going to be due in April. And then also your general work plan will be due at that same time. And we're like, well, now that we've been through this whole assessment process, wouldn't it make more sense to have the work plan be able to come out around involving the things that will be in your strategic plan and have time to think about what you learned in the assessment, influencing what's in the work plan, right? So that's what we're looking at doing. And yeah, that's what I'll say about that.
Okay, Carmen, so you were saying that the exercise that we are doing around the regional assessment will be feeding the actual work plan, but the due date is not going to be until 2024, correct?
That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that we would like to tie them together. And right now, they would not naturally be tied together because the work plan is due at the same time as the regional system assessment. So we want to have a conversation with you about how it is that we might tie those together in a productive way. And I don't have all the answers on this because I want to have the conversation with you as hub directors to make sure that what we're doing fits with your work. And I want to make sure that we answer questions, but that we also get to the other things on the agenda. And I'm sorry, I don't have the agenda in front of me to see how much time I might have, Hillary.
Renee just put something in the chat, which was something that was just on my mind as well, which is like, I wonder if there is a current like chart of deliverables and what the current due date is and where there might be flexibility, because I think me personally, I'm just getting confused about what is due, where there's flexibility, it's hard for me to have the conversation maybe without, I've lost sight of the full scope, maybe is what I'm trying to say.
No, that makes sense, Dorothy. I'm sorry, that's on us, not on you, to be sorry. I do not have access to that document right now. I would need to dig. Can I search for it and we can pull it up later? Or maybe send it out? Okay.
And I think we just want to make this is a bigger conversation. As we can see from questions and comments, that this is something that's on everyone's mind. And so I know we have this very sort of small window that we just wanted to tell you, like, don't feel I think what we were hoping to say is don't feel the pressure of an April due date. And like, we'd like to align the work, but it is a bigger conversation. So Kelly, did you have something?
I think I'm just adding to what you're saying, Hillary. And so when we started the assessment process in DEEP, we had to make sure that the strategic planning that we did last fall in our regular hub work and our hub board work, and then with our regional stewardship council, that we were really heading in the same direction. And so I want to say that when I say our work plan, it's because it's the work plan we created at our strategic session in October. So our annual session in the past, our due date used to be in December. And so we used to do our work session in October to create our work plan. So we did a little bit of that work last year. And then we dove into this regional assessment. And what it did is that backed up that the items in our work plan were either right on or needed to have some adjustments. And so our work has been looking at the regional assessment with an eye over here, making sure that our work plan. So when I say that I'm going to submit my work plan, I don't plan to do a lot of changes to my work plan this year, and focusing more on the regional assessment and then continuing on And what I've always said to my coach, Heidi, is I feel like our work plan is a bit of a living document. And we're going to, as we learn our issues and as we work through these community conversations, we're going to make some edits. And I think that we'll get into the real cycle of things through 23, 24 year. So by this time next year, we're really in the rhythm of it. Right now, we're in the transition. So in the transition, I'm not making very many changes to my work plan.
Yeah.
I'm submitting it. It is.
I think that makes a lot
I'm
of
not doing it
sense,
over.
Kelly. I mean, your work, it's not like every year you like cross off all the work that you did and like crumple it up and be like done, and then you just make a whole new one with all new work on it. It makes sense that it's an updated living document.
And our hope is to make sure that when we work with when we meet with the Hub Association Executive Committee, that we're really looking at where does that work naturally fall, and how can we line up the deliverable timelines to make it natural, as opposed to like having to do work that you don't normally do at that time. So that is what our hope is for part of the meeting. I mean, we have so many things to talk about. We're going to need multiple meetings likely, but that's where we would like to go with that. Okay, I'm going to keep our meeting moving along. Feel free to reach out if you have more questions. Feel free to reach out to Carmen and I. We're happy to answer questions and connect with you about any of that information. Catherine, I'll just sing your name. There you are. Okay, I'm going to hand the meeting over to you now.
Okay, great. Can I share? Yes, I can. Awesome. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all. Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
I'm gonna assume yes. Okay, thank you. And now I realize that I have too many things covering. Oh, all right, sorry. Technology is grand until it's not. Hi, I'm here to talk with you guys today about the provider survey that went out to all providers across the state last year. You guys have continually been awesome about helping us out with that provider survey and getting it out to providers in your hubs. And so I wanted to bring back some results for you. And hopefully now I'm actually going. Okay, there we go. I am Catherine Pears. I'm one of the co-PIs on the preschool development grant needs and strengths assessment that's been going on now for a number of years. I'm working with Beth Green, who's the co-principal investigator at Portland State. And as you guys may or may not recall, we've been doing these provider surveys now for about, I think since about 2019, where in the spring of every year, we send out this survey and to all folks who are on the child care registry in Oregon. So it goes to directors, owners, head teachers, assistant teachers, aides. We also, this past year, sent it to EI, ECSE specialists, folks in relief nurseries, really trying to get as broad a range as we can in terms of talking with providers. It was an online survey. It was offered in 5 languages. Folks could also call in and take it either on the phone or they could do it via paper. And everybody who participated received a $20 Amazon gift card for doing the survey. And just before we start, I'm here today to share the data that came out of the survey. I want to say that I know that some of this, or I intuit that some of it is going to be not news to you about how providers are feeling and about how the workforce is faring at the moment. And I bring it more to sort of validate the kinds of things that people have been thinking and saying, and to sort of show that these things are happening across the region, as well as to bring some information that came from the providers themselves about things that might help at the moment. And also, as we're going ahead, I'm going to try to watch the chat box, but I'm bad at multitasking there. So if you have a burning question that you really want answered, please feel free to interrupt me. I'm good with that. Knowing that I can't see you, so just shout it out. Okay, So we had across the state, we had about just over 2,100 providers who participated. If we kind of look at who they were, over a third of them had identified their role as being that of lead teacher. We also had assistants and aides, other people in the classroom, directors and owners, and then the EISE specialists, folks who were kind of like assistant directors, managers, or coaches, and then folks who are family advocates or home visitors. Had a lot of representation from community-based child care centers that weren't Head Start, although quite a bit, almost a quarter for both Head Start and family and home-based child care. So a nice sort of diversity of different kinds of facilities. And then we asked programs to identify whether they had any state-funded pre-K slots, and we found that about a little under 20% had OPK funded slots, about 10% have preschool promise slots, and then the big majority, which isn't a surprise, didn't have state-funded pre-K. To give you a sense of what perhaps
Is it me?
Catherine froze for me. Catherine, are you there? Couldn't tell if it was my internet or her net.
It's hers.
Okay, yep, it is. I could sing a song, but I have a really terrible singing voice, so I'm not gonna do that. In my head, I sing the Jeopardy song when there are awkward moments like these in meetings where you're like, well, there's nothing I can do right now, so I'm just gonna talk awkwardly at people. Glad this is gonna go on YouTube. Shira, I'm not singing. You really don't want to hear my singing voice. So it looks like Catherine hopped off. Maybe she's gonna come back on. And if not, well, we could just move on to our next topic too. Luckily, Erin's here. Everyone doing okay? I can only see a couple faces. Heather, I appreciate the thumbs up. Thank you.
Let's give her just like a minute or two to come back on.
Yeah, that sounds like a great plan. We're all going to get really organized about timelines and things, just so we're all like, we're working that way.
Hillary, one question I had that maybe others would be interested in is if there's an opportunity to influence what the survey that she's talking about is going to ask, because I know in your regional system assessments, I mean, you've already asked a lot of questions and you've gotten a lot of information, but many of you have like sort of the next round of deeper questions or questions related to strategies that could be really important to ask. Or like nuances, like Molly and I were having conversations about how to think about quality in different ways. You know, there might be very specific things that you're trying to get at. So I'm curious, like in this conversation, I want all of you to be thinking about what are some of the questions you have for providers, and let's explore if there's any opportunity to maybe partner in this survey to have it. Hey, Catherine, you're back. I was just having some thoughts, even from what you initially said, just thinking about how to take this amazing survey moving forward and really kind of like leverage some of the questions that are emerging through this regional system assessment process. But we'll get there. I'm jumping the gun. I was filling the space while you were gone as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm sorry, guys. I don't know what happened other than to say that sometimes my internet just decides it's not going to be, and I've been home ill, as you might hear in my voice. So it's just been that kind of day. So I don't know where did I freeze for you guys?
We are looking at the participant screen.
Okay. Was it the income or the?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep,
great.
start here.
Okay, awesome. So income, Median was about $40,000 to $50,000 a year. And then about a third of the respondents reported that they had incomes less than 200% of the federal poverty level. So again, I don't think this is going to be surprising to any of you, just to sort of see where the participants were located. So this year, for the first time, we asked some questions that were less about professional development and coaching and what providers were doing for quality care, and more about how providers themselves were doing. We had started this in the 2020 to 2021 year, but this year we actually said we used a screening instrument that is used to kind of figure out whether you want to say, okay, your level of anxiety is high enough that you could actually be diagnosable with an anxiety issue or depression issue. And what we found was, when we did this screener, we found that about 26% of the providers reported levels of anxiety that really said, hey, this could be a clinical diagnosis. And to give you a little bit of a comparison, in some studies that were done just a couple of years ago looking at general population, about a little under 5% of people came up with those kinds of scores. So, this is about 5 times the number in the general population. And then when we asked about symptoms of depression, about 16% of providers reported levels of depression that would make you want to say, okay, you should go seek further consultation. So it's not a diagnosis, but it's a red flag. And those rates are about 6% in the general population. So this is about 2.5 times higher. And then we asked providers just to say how often they felt overwhelmed, burdened, like you don't have the skills you need to effectively support or manage children's behaviors. And about 52% of the providers said that they sometimes, often, or almost always felt that way. So a majority of our providers are spending at least sometimes feeling like really overwhelmed. And again, I don't think this is new information to you guys, but just to kind of validate some of the things that at least I've been hearing out there about the childcare workforce. The highest rates of distress we found, so this means that people who were well above the average for the entire group, was directors. The highest rates of distress were reported by directors and ECSC specialists, by providers who were working in Head Start, relief nurseries, and or EICSE programs, by providers who identified as Native American or Native Alaskan, and in programs with Preschool Promise or OPK slots. Where we found the lowest levels of distress, and this was much lower, markedly lower, was among owners and providers who were working in home or family-based facilities. So real contrast there. And then just as a check, just to say that the providers who felt overwhelmed more frequently tended to also have higher anxiety and depression scores, which may sound like, well, of course, but that's just to say that we can't say whether the feeling of being overwhelmed comes from our also feeling anxious and depressed, or if anxious and depressed comes from being overwhelmed, but just to say that that's a constellation of things that we're really seeing that happen to be together in providers right now. We also had been hearing, and we wanted to check this out, about the workforce. There just not being enough people in the workforce. We've heard about that across sectors, but particularly in the childcare sector. And so we asked directors or owners, so people who were in charge of programs, how many of them had lost at least one provider, not themselves, other than themselves, during the past year. And so you'll see that in general, that happened for about 40% of all programs. But when we broke it down to look at the kinds of programs, it's happening. We see that it's happening a lot in Head Start. Also, almost as much in most community-based centers. A little less in programs that are co-located in K through 12, and then a lot less in home-based childcare. And yes, home-based childcare tends to have fewer employees, but I want to point out that we asked them to think about to tell us they'd lost somebody other than themselves. So they had to be thinking about an employee that they had. Of the people that had employees, about a quarter had lost somebody. And then we asked why they were losing providers. And here, the contrast is interesting. You'll see, Sorry, I keep doing this. I move you guys around because I have a picture and then I mess up my stuff. Just to wonder why people had left. And what we find is that more staff are quitting. So the bar here, the top bar, is the percentages in 2020 that we reported, sorry, in 2022. And then this bar below it is the percentages that were reported in 2021. So that covered that year 2020 to 2021, or the year where, you know, COVID really had shut down a lot of things. And so not surprisingly, in that year, we saw a lot of folks who had reduced hours, that who had to lay off or furlough staff. And by contrast, we see that by the time last year, what we were seeing is that almost a quarter more of programs were saying that they had staff who were just leaving, they were really markedly reduced in terms of having to reduce hours or lay off staff or furlough staff. So there's really a switch there. So we asked the providers themselves about what would help them to either remain in the future in the childcare sector, or what would help them to come back if they were not working there any longer. And in a piece of data that will be of no surprise to anybody, right? The number one, we asked them to pick the top 3 reasons or top 3 barriers. And the number one is needing better wages or benefits, not a surprise. And then number 2, not a surprise when we think about the shortages in this sector, is that folks are feeling, you know, the providers themselves are feeling they don't have enough coworkers, or they're not enough staff. But interestingly here, the number 3 reason was feeling like the providers feeling like they didn't have enough recognition and inclusion by other staff, and this also reads management and parents. So really a lack of feeling valued and like they're really being seen. And that's the 3rd most reason. And then, you know, we can group things into other things like needing transportation or childcare or other options. And then what is also interesting about this, and particularly if we think about the contrast from the year before, is people are not naming COVID as being a reason. And it used to be like the 2nd most cited barrier. So that's really changed. Yeah, Hillary.
There's a question in the chat. Did they also
thank you.
answer the questions about how many unfilled positions they had?
We didn't have a question about unfilled positions per se. We had a question about shortages. So there was a question about shortages, and that was high. And I don't want to say, because I'm going to completely get it wrong. I can look it up though after we stop and just see for you guys. But yes, there were, I mean, shortages. The reason I showed you people having lost people is that's about the same as shortages. So yeah, there's a lot of shortage out there. Thank you for bringing that forward, Hillary. Okay. So then we asked some questions. We often ask questions about what providers are doing in terms of professional development and coaching. And we also this year asked some questions, particularly about coaching, and also about the use of mental health consultation, because the state's made some investments in those things. And so we asked providers if they had ever sought support for working with a child whose behaviors they really experienced as challenging. And we found that 53% of all providers, so again, the majority, had tried sometime in the last year, tried themselves to get support for working with a particular child. And we asked them about, okay, what were those barriers? Did you experience barriers, and if so, what were they? And so of those people who tried to get support, 2/3 of them said that they believed that the biggest barrier was that the families themselves had difficulty acknowledging that the child's behavior was challenging. Another almost 60% felt like the families themselves were having difficulties addressing problems at home. And then a majority, or 50%, have had problems with the lengthy process to get early intervention or childhood preschool special education support or evaluation, or there weren't enough behavioral specialists, or it was too long a wait. And these kind of bring up a couple of thoughts here. I mean, as childcare providers, you know, all childcare providers work with families. That's one of the things that they do. And we think about, you know, really wanting childcare providers and families to be engaged. And so one thing that these two barriers bring up is maybe that providers need some more support and training around talking with parents about behaviors that they see as challenging, or really, you know, hitting that parent engagement a little harder. So they really are partnering with parents, and, you know, it's not possible in all cases, and isn't solely on the provider, but that might help a little bit, as well as we've got research suggesting that implicit biases might exist, that, you know, providers might be sort of expecting to see behaviors from certain children. And so having more professional development around recognizing those biases may also be needed. And then in terms of the lengthy processes to get support, this really calls it into the highlight the need for more services and increased accessibility for providers.
Catherine, there's another question in the chat. Are these results being shared with the Hub's ECSE partners?
Not necessarily specifically. They are on the website, and I'm going to give you the link in the chat. They're on the ELD website, and I definitely have shared them with the departments at ELD. And if there's another place where you think it would be really good to go and talk about this, let me know, and let, you know, Hillary and Carmen and folks know, because I'm always happy to take the show on the road. I really do want people to make as much use of the data as possible. So thank you for asking.
Catherine, the result, this has been shared with
okay, good.
ECSE partners. We
Thank
have
you.
shared it in our state leadership inclusion team.
Awesome.
And so it's been shared out to partners via that, but I think it would be great to pass along your, to extend your invitation to them too. So I'll make sure that we connect and do that.
Great, thanks, Carmen.
And is this data available by county?
No, not yet. Let me get there when we get to the end. Okay, I will keep that in my head though. Okay, we also asked about provider access. The provider themselves, not the program, but the provider's access to mental health consultants. And we found that about, you know, less than a quarter had access to a mental health consultant, and then less than 20% of the providers that actually worked with a mental health consultant. And again, just to sort of break down by who was working with folks, you know, there's about 25% of teachers had access, and a little less than that had worked with them. Assistant teachers and aides, that, you know, the other people in the classroom, had less access and were less likely to work with them. You've got directors had a little bit more access. Certainly ECSE specialists did. And then within the family base, the owners tended to be family and home based. You know, there was little access there. When we look at the kind of facility, again, this won't be surprising to anybody, Head Start programs had the most access, and as did other sort of publicly funded programs, where there was less access in programs that are not traditionally publicly funded, except if you look down here, when we look at like Preschool Promise, right, our mixed delivery system, there was more access there than for programs that didn't have any state funding. We also asked folks about whether they had received any coaching in the past year. And we found that a little over a quarter of providers had received coaching. And this was really identified and defined as having a mentor or a coach who was really working on program-based, practice-based kinds of things. So it was a pretty narrow, it was a very specific definition. And so when we asked people if they'd had it, we find that, again, lead teachers are by far have the most access, although that's less than half of all lead teachers, and that it sort of decreases for other folks in the classroom. That Head Start, again, not surprisingly, had the most access, those kinds of programs, although a lot of other community-based childcare centers did have access to coaching, which was good to see, and that there was perhaps less availability to other programs.
Hey, Catherine,
Uh-huh.
can I jump in with a clarification there?
Yes.
You're using the word access, and I was interpreting this as had like sought and received, because
yeah,
everyone has access to coaching through their CCRNR and others. So is this truly that people said that they didn't have access, or is it that they said, no, I haven't received it?
That's a good, thanks, Carmen. That's a really good clarification. And it is received, yes, had been able to receive it. Good point. Now, what we don't know is whether they like tried to access it and there weren't enough people to, I can't tell you that. We did not ask why they hadn't had coaching, which actually we should find out.
Yeah, that would be really interesting too.
Yeah.
It's like, did they try,
Yeah.
or they,
Right,
or
or
like
they-
they had one session and they're like, meh.
Yeah,
I didn't like
that's a
it.
good, well, but here's, thank you for your segue that you have just provided me. Because we asked the people who hadn't had coaching, whether they would like to receive coaching. So hadn't received coaching in the past year, would you like to receive coaching? And 67% of those folks, so a good 2/3 said that they would like to have coaching. And so Carmen, that makes me really want to know why they didn't get it. And we need to dig a little deeper in there. But clearly people want it. And we also found that in the providers group who said that they would like to receive coaching, if you look, their scores on those distress variables, so like anxiety and depression and feeling overwhelmed, were significantly higher than the scores of people who wouldn't want to have coaching, who said they wouldn't want to have coaching, which is, you know, interesting and leads to the possibility that folks are seeing coaching as a way of getting support around the kinds of distress, or at least helping them feel less overwhelmed. So there's obviously like a really big desire out there. And the question would be, I think what you're sort of alluding to, Carmen, is why, if there's a desire and there is access, why isn't there more receipt of coaching? So, but the good news is that people are looking at this as something that could be really helpful. And so it may be a question of just getting the word out more, getting more resources, that we don't know yet. And I am going to leave that right here by saying that there's a lot more information in the report, and I'll put the link in the chat box, but you can also get it here. I'm going to put the link in the chat box, and that the 2023 provider survey is coming in March. We're going to be distributing flyers before then to CCR&Rs and hubs, and asking you as always, and you guys are absolutely awesome and brilliant about getting the word out to providers in your hubs. I talked to the CCR&Rs this morning, and they're great about getting the word out too, and you've been wonderful in the past, and so we'll be hitting you up for aid in the future. And I'm going to stop sharing so that I can actually see questions and take questions, and happy to hear any and all questions.
There were a
And
couple more
here's the link
that I didn't get to, Catherine.
Okay. Okay, yeah, thank you, Kelly. That was we did actually try to use language that would not imply that it was any one way necessarily. I'm glad you noticed that. Yes, the definition of the coaching would include the coaching provided by the QISs. The preferred languages for coaching, thank you, Begonia, for bringing that up, because in fact, I did not share it in this because I was only supposed to take 20 minutes, but we did ask folks about whether they had received coaching in their preferred language, and whether materials were available. And it was quite striking that for folks who were speaking in languages other than English, I mean, in general, it was about 80% and higher, but for folks who who were speaking other languages, they were not doing, that was not nearly as high as English speakers. So there's definitely a need for coaching in other languages, as well as materials in other language. And we didn't talk specifically about the type of coaching, although we asked a bunch of follow-up questions about what they did in coaching. And that's in the report, if you want to kind of look more about like what kinds of activities they were doing, and trying to get a sense of what was happening. And that is an awesome question, Michelle. And what I hope as the writer and the recommender in that report, or one of the writers and recommenders, is that this will provide particularly more information as the state moves forward with the coaching initiatives that they've got going, as well as the mental health consultation initiatives, just in terms of what does it seem to be available, or how people are making use of it, of the resources that are out there. As well as, I think, just again, kind of helping to reiterate that folks are stressed. Folks are really stressed, and the workforce is really, really thin right now. And that we've got to, that the changes have to be made to support this workforce. Other questions, comments?
Can you speak something about the people that say that if they ran an OPK or per-school programs, they were more overwhelmed than other programs? Did they specify why?
We did not ask them that. That's a really good question, and I don't know. I wonder if it has something to do with, I mean, if you looked at that list of folks, of the kinds of programs that where people were feeling overwhelmed, those are programs that may be working with families with a lot of needs, and that might be part of it. But I'm not sure. It's a really good question. This is where survey data does not give us all that we want. I'd like to sit down and have conversations, and we have done that in the past and might be able to do that in the future. Renee.
Hey there, just circling back to the availability by county.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So there, we asked respondents to give both their zip code and their county. And so we do know that, and we did ask respondents to give what's called broad consent to share their de-identified data with folks if that was a possibility. So I think there are possibilities to get data by county. My caveat on this is that there's not enough of me in the world to do all the analysis for by county or by hub. So where data might be available, I don't know about analysis help.
Right. Yeah, just having the data be available is really helpful. I mean, this is compelling, but it's at the state level, and each of us are really charged with unpacking what we can do in our own region. Right. And so without that county level data, we basically have to replicate it. We have to all do it again.
And that's silly. And that is really silly. And I know that keeps happening. And so my great wish and my little flag that I'm waving around these days is to share the data. And that's where, I mean, there's no point in hoarding data. So if we can figure out ways to get it out to people in ways that are, then where you can use it meaningfully, then I'm all for that. And particularly since, like I said, we have broad consent. So
that would be super helpful. And I totally get the lack of, person power for the analysis part, but just having the access to the data would be really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And so I will say to everybody, I'm gonna take that back to the researchers, the folks that I'm working with at ELD and the research departments, and really talk about what we can do for that. Because we also said we were going to do that with the household survey, which just closed, by the way, with about almost 4,000 participants. So we got a lot of households in Oregon who answered that survey, and we said we'd make that available too. So stay tuned for more about data sharing. And Michelle, you're right, and I will talk to Beth about that with the Elmo map. I know that they're gonna be updating it anyway very soon, using various data, so that's also coming. So I know I kind of got one a little over time. Sorry, Hillary.
That's okay.
But please feel free. I'm going to put my contact info in the chat box if you have questions to reach out. And if you really want data and you don't hear from me, bug me. I give you carte blanche to do that. And thank you for listening and for, again, all your efforts in really helping us to get the data. And I think that, as we go into this next year, we might be reaching out to some folks. We're really, I mean, we've learned from doing the family survey this year that we've been able to really get to some communities that we hadn't been able to reach before. So we may reach out and say, hey, we haven't heard from these 2 counties very much in the past. Could you help us? Just to really represent, and then yes, make the data available to you.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to switch gears just a little bit, and I'm going to hand this over to Erin Watson.
Sorry, let me do my like one big cough before I start talking. Hi, everyone. So this is going to be kind of a big topic change, but one that I have heard percolate up in a lot of the coaching calls that we've been having, and one that I just know from personal experience is really important when you're doing the work that you do. And that's how do you talk about what systems change is to people who may be in a slightly different paradigm? How do you help them expand their imagination for what it looks like, what the benefits are, kind of get them buying in, all in the service of basically supporting the work that you'll be doing through your system strategic plan. So I just wanted to take a little bit of time to get us all sharing our experiences and our ideas with how have you tried to describe this to hub partners or other kinds of partners who are going to be involved in this work? What are some of the visuals or the analogies or the ways of describing this that have really worked and resonated with people? And I'm hoping that we can all kind of expand our toolkit, so to speak, of how to talk about this. I know I've read research in the past that calls out that talking about this work clearly and effectively is like one of the biggest barriers people early childhood collaboratives face, because it's just really different than what people are often used to. So there's a couple questions that I know Hillary sent out in advance. The first one, let me just get this synced so that you can see it. The first one we're gonna think about is this one. And in 1 second, Hillary, wink, wink, is going to, good, awesome. We're gonna divide you up in pairs. And I want you just to think about this question. How would you describe the difference between a systems change approach and more of the kind of typical programmatic or like simple kind of approaches that are often used? How would you describe it? And you can also think about this next question in case you're an overachiever and move quickly, is what have you found that has helped hub partners understand this? Like, what have you done to help communicate this that's worked? Because that's going to be the beginning of our conversation and sharing. So both, how do you personally, when in your communications, describe what systems change is and how it's different than some other approaches? And given that, what have been some techniques that you've used to help other people understand that? Bye, Molly. So why don't we take 7 minutes, Hillary, to have this conversation, and I'm going to put those questions in the chat for people, so you'll have them. Does anyone have any questions on that? Those questions that I posed? Okay, well, let's do it. Some people have to leave, that's okay. Hillary, if you want to pair us up, and let's just do this for about 8 minutes, 7 minutes, I said, and then we'll come back and we'll share and try to get some collective ideas and strategies that people can use. They have 60 seconds to come back to the meeting. That was kind of anticlimactic when I said I'm doing it, and then and it's okay. We're just getting ready. It's just like the slow motion into it. So you can always tell when people come back from a paired breakout because they have their videos on. It's like, oh, hi everyone, how you doing? Awesome. Okay. So I was just mentioning to the group who was left in kind of the waiting room as you were all talking. I really want this to be like a very open conversation where we just like are really real about, you know, what works, what doesn't work, how do we do this? Because this whole task of trying to describe what the heck systems change is actually really difficult. And that's coming from someone who's been doing this for a long time. It's difficult. And so, you know, like, let's just kind of have this as an open discussion. Before we start though, I want to take a little poll. This is going to be a very high-tech, low-tech poll. You know, the little reaction things. Raise your hand if you ever struggled with trying to describe what systems change is, or had some like kind of confusion coming from people that you're trying to describe this to. Right? Can we all like have a moment of like, yeah, okay. Right? It's hard. It's really hard. So I say that to help normalize that this is something everyone deals with. And the better we are at describing this, the easier it is to get lots of different partners engaged in the work. So let's just do some kind of sharing. First, I wanted to get a sense of how do you all personally, like in your own head, if we were stuck in an elevator together and I asked you, how would you describe systems change? How would you describe it? And sort of differentiate it from other approaches that are kind of commonly used. What did people talk about in your peer group? And just unmute yourself. Don't use the chat, just unmute yourself.
Okay, I'll break the silence. So one of the things and the difference for me between systems change and programmatic change or programmatic approaches is programmatic to me is really internally focused about the program itself and how the program may or may not be interacting with their clients, where systems change is looking at an issue or something that you may be facing that is bigger picture and can impact clients who may or may not be accessing your services, but can also benefit anyone who could benefit from your services.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not the best. It's less internally focused on that single program. And typically will include multiple sectors.
How about others?
I don't like that programmatic will be internally because we center parents' voice, so it will be internally and externally because we do not build something for them without them. But I will say that for me, programmatic will focus only in certain aspects of practices, such as practices or resource flow or policies. But for me, systems change will also add the structural change, the relational change, and many other aspects. And you also need to be thinking about what is your mental model for like changing things, right? What is triggering those changes?
Mm-hmm. Others, let's just popcorn out like 1 or 2 more minutes. Other ways that you're thinking about the difference in describing these things. I've gotten really good at waiting, by the way. So I know that's like going to be really uncomfortable, but I'm just going to give you like a little bit longer to percolate.
This is Kelly. I don't know if this is a good answer to this question. And if Michelle, my partner, was with me, she would elbow me and help me out. But I think that how I've been doing it recently is I've been focusing in on children in our isolated and remote communities that have no Head Start, no preschool, and no childcare in their communities. They have a really low birth rate. So they range from 0 to 6 children in 3 to 5 year old ages in that preschool age. So there's years that they don't even have students that would qualify for preschool. And so when I zero in on that, I say, but the way we have to address this is through systems. So we need to create a system that creates a way for money to flow into that isolated remote community. So those children have this same access to high quality preschool like the rest of Oregon children.
Yeah, that's a good technique. You kind of put a constraint on it, so it forces people to think, what if programs didn't exist? What else would need to be done to meet their needs? Yep.
I think I had a hard time finding just words. I had to paint a picture or take people. I have to connect a person to another person.
Yeah. I'm going to say tell stories because that kind of is what you were talking about a little bit. You jumped ahead, Kelly, because you're an overachiever in the best kind of way. So I just started putting some notes here. I'll send these to you all so you have a kind of a record. One way that I found can be helpful to distinguish this is kind of like highlighting that often programmatic or kind of like typical approaches focus on like one issue in isolation. So like I'm working with a community right now in another state that trained and hired a bunch of like aides to help deal with the workforce shortage and burnout. And their whole goal was like, okay, we're going to sort of like help the workforce stay in because that's going to help us make everything okay. And I'm trying to help them see like, okay, that may be a necessary strategy right now, but alone it's really insufficient to deal with all the other stuff that's ultimately making things the way they are. And then compare that to, honestly, some of the things that we've started talking about, even in these peer-to-peers, and that some of the hubs have been playing with in their sense making, is just kind of building on what Kelly was saying, start to tell a different type of story of how there's multiple issues working together to keep things the way they are. And that if we focus on just one issue, which is kind of the typical way people do it, if you just focus on one issue without seeing the bigger picture, oftentimes you don't make the change, or you can actually even make it worse because you don't realize how things might inadvertently kind of cascade on each other. So I found that really helpful, just to normalize like, hey, this is how we've all been taught in school, is you like do kind of this very narrow, affect one thing and then watch it. But there's just a different paradigm of problem solving that often is more effective. Okay, so building on some of those ideas, what are other ways that you all have helped hub partners really understand systems change? So Kelly was saying kind of telling stories, creating some kind of case examples almost where people would have to start thinking about systems. What are other ways that you all have found helpful to get hub partners to get this? And like Jillian said, it's a language that some sectors don't always understand. So what's helped with kind of bridging that?
One of the things that we've done here, and it kind of, the concept happened before we had our early learning system theory of change, and we're really talking about it as systems change, but was the creation of Polywog, and it bubbled up out of the health sector and aligning how families access services. And so having a tangible example of something that through the process of creation really was a systems change strategy before we were talking about it as systems change, has been helpful for our partners to think about how we went through that process and worked together.
That's awesome. So like, I'm gonna butcher this spelling, polywog? Is that how you spell it? Christy's giving me the
2 L's.
well. Oh, that's a much cuter spelling. So like example, polywog. Great. Do others have some example systems change strategies that you like bring into conversations that seem to resonate well in addition to polywog? Oh,
I think that when we actually participated on the pre-K for all Washington County, it was really useful to look at the Multnomah model and then guide the parents through the different elements. It was really powerful, and see examples also from other regions.
mm-hmm.
And sometimes when we're innovative, for example, we have community uplift, which is similar to polywog, not the same. Now we're having CCOs saying, can we meet and see how we can mine your information that's in community uplift? And it's like, gee, we're really glad that you're coming to the table, and we're glad that we're of some use as, a systemic piece. So now they want to look at, the data and the information and see how together we can look at the information and use it. So I think it may not be linear, but sometimes it happens, in other ways.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Do you guys have any metaphors or visuals that you use that help people get their head around this? I have a very simple one that I used to use in training. This is animated. This is back when my animation skills were kind of basic. That you can have like the best program ever, best design program, best implemented program, but all these different system issues, kind of like the things you guys were talking about. And Begonia that you were talking about, the structural issues, the policies, the practices, the connections, the mindsets, all of those system issues like kind of compound on each other. And even if you're trying to do good programmatic work, like all this system stuff just gets in the way. You can't ignore it. Like programs don't operate in vacuums. And sometimes if I'm talking with groups that are like very in the program bucket, it's really hard for them to think outside of it. I talk about like programs plus systems. And just normalize like, hey, programs are necessary. We need programs. And they're never going to be sufficient to actually fully meet the needs of kids and families and deal with all the other stuff that's getting in the way. And so you can't ignore all of those system issues. You have to deal with them at the same time, and that really is where partnerships come to play. But this sometimes helps because then you're like, validating, hey, your work is meaningful. We need programs. We're not saying that, and it's not enough just to focus on programs if we're not also focusing on the larger system. That's helped.
So I wonder, sometimes one of the things that I'm missing, and this is something that Shira actually shared with me, is that one of the reasons why really systems change do not happen that are the most frequently used answers or excuses, right? So one is the lack of funding. The other one is, well, we actually have a soft influence, right? But this is higher than me, or this is more like a Salem or the feds, right? But that we cannot make that decision. Or there is actually a misalignment in the system from the funder, or there are people that think, oh, you know what, I like the old ways, I don't like to change, right? So how do we go about those things when we always hear this language?
What do you guys think? I actually find people often don't say, I don't like to change. They just resist you in other ways. But through the lines, they're saying that. How do you guys deal with this? Because those are common excuses. People just focus on lack of funding, or they just kind of hide behind, well, we don't have any power. It's all the it's all the state's issues. We don't have any power. I don't like change. But how do you guys deal with those excuses?
I feel like my response to I don't like change is that nobody does. It's painful. We can allow for room for it to be painful, for growth to be challenging, and still know that we need to do it because it's what's best for children and families, but also what's best for us as we're doing this work. If we want to build good things, then things are going to have to change. It'll be more sustainable if we do so, so we can't not.
How about this? Go ahead.
No, I was thinking that for me, sometimes it's also, it's not, you cannot go and just climb Mount Hood if you don't even know how to walk, right? So the ultimate goal might be, yes, once you are professional in walking and maybe hiking, maybe climbing, then we deal with Mount Hood. But in the meantime, this is how we can be moving systems change forward, right?
Yeah, I always counter this. Like, I'm pretty direct, actually, when I am in community spaces where we're problem solving. And I just say, well, what do you have the power to change in your local scope of influence? You know, like, you gotta have power to do something. What do you have the power to do? And let's start there instead of thinking what you don't have the power to change. And I think it builds on a response to this other excuse around lack of funding. Fine, yes, let's all acknowledge that funding, there's never enough funding. There never has been and there never will be. And think of all the other things in our systems that are helping and hindering our outcomes. And let's focus on those things, because again, like, remember this picture of the rocks, boulders, pebbles? Notice that financial resources is a pebble, because even if you happen to get some resources this year, because all of this other stuff up here, there's no guarantee that that funding is going to be sustained unless mindsets, goals, decision-making, policies, and practice and connections are in place to make sure it's sustained. So it's kind of like, again, with the program focus, funding is important, it's necessary, but it's not a big leverage point. And it's, you know, you're gonna work really hard to get some funding, and then it runs out and you're back to square one. Where if we focus on other things up here, that funding's naturally going to be available because the whole system's going to be aligned in such a way that we'll allocate money to where we need it to go. This is actually another analogy that I've used that's really helpful. And you can tie it back to the research on systems and systems change. That there are certain things that just have bigger weight and more of a ripple effect on other things in these systems. And let's all start focusing at least simultaneously on this stuff, not just on the programs and funding, which is where often everyone focuses. Okay. Other ideas. I've got like maybe one or two other things I can show you. Anything else that people have found helpful in talking with people about systems change?
I would say, and it's not from experience here, I think I'm still a little intimidated at that concept of bringing this to the folks, but I think that this has been really helpful. But I also, like, as we're talking through this, what's coming to me is like empowerment and also passion. I mean, if we think about what we all went to school for and why we all decided to pick our chosen fields, it probably is more related to that system change level than those program levels. And I think that if we can kind of motivate our partners with that, you know, big thought thinking, that system level change, the goal changing, I think that that aligns better with our initial passions or initial desires to do this work. But I think that people have kind of found themselves doing the programmatic changes because you know, I could do this on my own. I don't need a whole system to change for this. This is something I have control over. So it seems to me like the discussion would be about kind of empowering and impassioning our partners.
And getting them excited about it, right? Totally. I mean, you can also like kind of differentiate. Again, you know, programs are often focused on kind of short-term gains. System change is focused on long-term transformative change. Programs can sometimes be siloed. Systems change is all around coordination. And like Begonia was saying, making sure there's like relationships in place to align and coordinate action. You know, it's kind of like helping to inspire, like you were saying, Shira, how can this actually be a help and help us get over some of the issues that we all encounter? It's not, you know, it's like moving from talking about my kids and my program to our kids. We're trying to ensure all kids and our kids are benefiting. So using some of that transition can also help kind of like perk people's interest and get them interested in changing. Okay, we're at time. I'll send you these notes, and I would encourage you to just keep talking about this. I know Hillary and I are helping to set up, and with Christy, a base camp where we can continue exchanging some ideas. So we'll work on putting these notes maybe up there. That can be a nice way to sort of introduce that platform and continue the conversation. Hillary or Carmen, anything else as people are zooming off?
Thanks, everyone. We appreciate you and all the work that you do. And I'll send out the recording and any other materials that need to be sent out, and have a lovely day.